I'm very excited to be here today and be able to present you the results from my dissertation that I've conducted in the last 3 years, at which I've been looking at the topic of bridging the intention-behavior gap in physical activity towards a dynamic within-person perspective. And starting out, we are currently facing an inactivity pandemic all over the world, with about a third of the world's adult population not meeting the WHO's criteria for being physically active enough. And these insufficient levels of physical activity are also one of the primary drivers of steadily rising rates of the prevalence of non-communicable diseases like heart disease, which already account for about 74% of all global mortality. Now, those are already enough reasons to look into interventions to foster physical activity in everyday life. And one of the key problems here is actually not that people don't know that physical activity would be good for them. Many people do have the goal or the intention that they want to be more physically active, but they fail to actually do so. And that is what we call the intention-behavior gap. The idea that intentions predict behavior actually comes from the theory of planned behavior, which puts intentions as the main driver of health behaviors such as physical activity. And there are also meta-analyses that show a strong effect of, a strong predictive effect of intentions for subsequent health behaviors of around R.50. However, as I said, there is the intention-behavior gap. That means goal intentions, which are broadly defined as self-instructions to attain certain outcomes, are not always translated into sustained physical activity practice. Analyses have shown that this is the case for about half of all goal intentions, which is actually quite a lot. And to explain this, there are several theoretical backgrounds which are relevant for my dissertation. And I want to show you 2 of those, starting with the socio-cognitive models with the example of the health action process approach. In this health action process approach, you see that it's separated into a motivational phase, which ends with the formulation of a goal intention, in this case for physical activity, for example. And then there's the volitional phase in which this goal intention is supposed to be translated into actual physical activity behavior. Now you can see there are different variables that are moderating this translation, but I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I just want to touch quickly on the theoretical background and say that this is a very deliberate or reflective route from intentions into behavior. And this deliberate and reflective route is accompanied by another route if we're looking at dual process models, which add another process to this. In this case, I want to show you the example of the temporal self-regulation theory, in which you again have the separation into the motivational sphere and then the translation of the intentions into actual behavior. And you again see the deliberate, or in this case called self-regulatory capacity route, which moderates this translation of intentions into behavior. But then you also have the behavioral prepotency, which is more of an automatic route or implicit route, which is, for example, the case if you imagine someone coming home from work and they're getting to their apartment, then the behavioral prepotency from that is the person is getting from this context, or is having in this context, is probably that they're probably more likely to sit on their couch and watch TV than go for a run. This behavioral prepotency is, for example, driven by habits or social norms, and then, of course, interacts with the self-regulatory capacity or more reflective route. Yes, this is basically the theoretical background to my dissertation, and based on this theoretical background, there are different intervention options that have been developed. And I want to show you one example, the implementation intentions, which I'm also going to take a look at in my dissertation. Implementation intentions are specific action plans. So here you again have this deliberate pathway, but then they also have a more automatic component, because you're combining one specific situation that offers a good opportunity for action, in our case, physical activity, with a goal-driven action. And you're doing that by combining it in a when, then, or if then sentence. So for example, if someone has the goal, I want to exercise more often, then a fitting implementation intention could be, when I come home from work, then I will put on my running shoes and go running for half an hour. Implementation intentions can help individuals recognize suitable context for physical activity. So this is, again, also more this deliberate, reflective route. That they can also establish clear context behavior if-then associations that facilitate more automatic initiation of physical activity. And studies have shown that that can effectively reduce the intention behavior gap and increase physical activity. And further, they can also be enhanced through reminders such as text messages or phone calls, which would then be called reinforced implementation intentions. However, these traditional intervention strategies have some limitations. Because they don't scale very well in terms of breadth. That means it's difficult to reach a large breadth of individuals with this often very costly interventions that you might need a coach or healthcare professional to set these implementations up based on your personal goals. So that is very difficult to do for a wide range of individuals. And they also don't scale very well into depth because with these more traditional intervention approaches, you're not following individuals throughout their daily life, and it's difficult to adapt it to different or changing contexts as people, constantly change their lives and go through different contexts that you might want to adapt to. And this is the place where a new intervention paradigm has come in the recent years, which is the just-in-time adaptive intervention. Just-in-time adaptive interventions, or JITIs, are designed to adjust to individuals' dynamic contexts, and doing that by harnessing principles of context-aware computing to provide personal health interventions when they're needed most. So with the core idea to intervene right at that moment when intervention can be most helpful for the individual. A popular example in the physical activity area, for example, would be to have a wearable that tracks your activity, and then when you have been sitting for too long, then maybe it sends you a message, hey, please get up and walk around for a little bit. But if you have some experience with this kind of interventions, then you also might know that they're usually not effective for very long. And the problem here might be that they're usually very simplistic so far, which one reason for that could be that they're not informed by psychological theory. With the reason for that, again, being that the psychological theories of health behavior we currently have are not very well suited to inform this kind of momentary interventions. Because effective JITIs actually need detailed understanding of what drives physical activity, in our case, within individuals, and especially on short time scales. So the health data, or the health behavior models that we have, which are based on mostly cross-sectional design or cross-sectional studies or longitudinal studies that observed individuals over longer durations, so weeks or months, are not very well suited to inform this kind of momentary interventions. And that is where we have a clear gap, which can be filled with research using, for example, ecological momentary assessment to find out more about, in our case, what the predictors or determinants of physical activity on this momentary level are, to then further develop dynamical models that could better inform just-in-time adaptive interventions. This brings me directly into my research objectives, where I want to explore these momentary determinants of physical activity using ecological momentary assessment. Based on that, develop a formative dynamical conceptual model to understand and address the micro timescale determinants of physical activity, and then also use that to inform intervention and especially just-in-time adaptive intervention design to bridge the intention behavior gap, which maps as follows onto the studies that I have conducted in the recent years. First of all, study 1, SMART PA, where we are looking at the momentary determinants of physical activity. Then study 2, PACES 3, where we are having a randomized controlled trial looking at the reinforced implementation intention intervention in a minimally guided mHealth approach. And we're also supplementing this randomized controlled trial with ecological momentary assessment to also gain some information about the potential mechanisms behind the intervention. And then we have a last study called the last JITI, where we take a more practical angle and see whether we can maybe innovate the implementation of just-in-time adaptive interventions to make them more scalable to larger applications. With this, we're starting with the first study, SMART PA. It was a ecological momentary assessment study where we prompted individuals 4 times during the day for 3 weeks, on each day at 9 in the morning, 1 at noon, and 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. And all the times we assessed stress, mood, pain, but also, of course, their physical activity intentions. In this case, however, these intentions are momentary intentions. They're not the goal intentions that I've been speaking of in the beginning, which have been mostly the topic of recent research on intentions, but it's momentary intentions. So we're asking, for example, at 1 p.m., do you intend to be physically active in the next 4 hours? So until the next prompt, which is coming at 5 p.m. And then at 5 p.m., people are reporting whether they have been active in the last 4 hours, so since the last prompt. And that way we can match that up and see what the momentary intention behavior gap is. And that is what we did here. Here in this area, you can see the effect of intention on physical activity behavior, with the intention behavior gap, or momentary intention behavior gap in this case being 25%. That means 25% of momentary physical activity intentions were not followed by a physical activity report at the EMA prompt 4 hours later. Which is actually pretty interesting that even on this short time scale of only 4 hours, you still have 25% of intentions that are not acted upon. So we looked at just looking at those cases where individuals had the intention to be physically active, what moderates this relationship between, what moderates the translation of intentions into actual physical activity behavior. And then we found effects of planning, self-efficacy, and intrinsic motivation, which in this case can also be viewed as the strength of these intentions. And for all of these cases, you can see that if individuals are reporting high values for planning, self-efficacy, and intrinsic motivation, then the intention behavior gap gets significantly lower. Next, we then also looked at whether we can find the determinants of intention formation and also their translation into physical activity behavior when we're looking at momentary affect and also contextual barriers. And then we looked at 3 paths. How do momentary affect and contextual barriers relate to the formation of momentary intentions? How do they relate to the translation of intentions into behavior? And how do they relate to the behavior directly? And what we found was that actually all of the momentary affective states that we assessed here and also the contextual barriers only were related to the formation of physical activity intentions and not to the translation of intentions into behavior, and also not directly to the physical activity behavior. And regarding the affective states, we saw that happy, active, and energetic states were positively related to the formation of intentions, and tired states, as well as contextual barriers, were negatively related to the formation of physical activity intentions, which is pretty much in line with the previous research. But it is very interesting that we only see this association with intentions. Yes, this brings me to the second study, PACES-3, where we conducted a randomized control trial looking at the reinforced implementation intention intervention. That means individuals in the intervention group received a coaching where they developed a personal SMART goal for physical activity and fitting implementation intentions. And then they were also reminded about those implementation intentions on every 3rd day of the ecological momentary assessment, which took place for 4 weeks. And additionally to this ecological momentary assessment, where we also assessed self-reported physical activity, we also had wearables to track physical activity and international physical activity questionnaire at pre-questionnaire, post-questionnaire, so after the 4-week intervention period, and then at follow-up 3 months after the post-questionnaire. And what we found was that there was a significant difference between the intervention group and the control group. but only for the self-reported moderate to vigorous physical activity minutes. This is a difference of almost 18 minutes per day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So that is actually already quite a bit of physical activity that the intervention group did more than the control group. However, we didn't find the effect to be significant when we used wearables, and also not based on the International Physical Activity Questionnaire. But maybe even more interesting if we're thinking about the determinants of physical activity and how we can put those into more dynamic micro timescale model, we can look at the potential mechanisms. And there we see that the intervention group first reported more daily physical activity intentions than the control group. They also reported smaller daily intention behavior gaps than the control group. But maybe most interesting, we can here see something that we interpret as this more automatic path that is also part of implementation intentions, because individuals in the intervention group reported more physical activity on days when they did not intend to be physically active according to the day before. And that is quite a lot more than the intervention group, which could be explained in a way that they did not have the intention to be physically active on the day before, on evening before when we asked them. But then on the following day, they encountered the context that they had specified in one of the implementation intentions, which triggered the formation of the momentary intention, which then turned into behavior in that moment. And based on those results, I have now come up with a formative dynamic conceptual model of physical activity. Okay. Up here, you have the goal intentions. Just trust me on that. And for on one day, this is the process from goal intention or overarching goal intention of a person and how that translates into one specific physical activity on one given day. So first, we have the process of the transitional intention formation, which is part of this initiation of physical activity. And there we have the reflective route that goes from the goal intentions into the transitional intention. And transitional intentions, that is important, is what I'm now calling these momentary intentions, because they are conceptually different from the goal intentions that we have previously talked about, mostly when we use the term intentions. Because when you're talking about these momentary intentions, then that is not just a motivational process anymore, but with momentary intention, you also always have some part of a volitional process, because you can set a momentary intention, like I want to go running tomorrow evening, without just thinking, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow evening? Am I going to have the time for that? And that is already a planning process, which makes it not purely motivational, as intentions have usually been viewed in the past. That's why I think we need this new term of transitional intentions. And yeah, then you have the reflective path from the goal intentions, which is also influenced by the more impulsive path, in this case, again, the behavioral prepotency. What we found empirically to be relevant here is the momentary affective state, and also the context cues, as we saw it in the PACES-3 study. But then, of course, you not only have this process of the transitional intention formation that has to happen in individuals, but also the translation of transitional intentions into actual behavior, which, as we saw in the first study, that planning specificity, intention strength, and self-efficacy are relevant for this process. And then if you're taking time into account, this happens over and over again, then over time you get the maintenance of an individual if they are successful enough in forming enough transitional intentions for physical activity and also acting on those. And based on this model, I've come up with a few theory-driven JITA designs or rules for just-in-time adaptive interventions, which is separated, which you based on this model, I would suggest that you need different rules for when individuals currently have the transitional intention to be physically active. or when they have not. So for example, if an individual would currently not have the transitional intention to be physically active, but the affective valence is high, so they're in a positive mood, their energetic arousal is high, they feel energetic, and contextual barriers are low, they currently have time, they're not working, then there might be a perfect moment to just prompt a physical activity and suggest, hey, now might be a good time. However, that might look different if these values differ. But I'm not going to go through that into too much detail for time reasons, but rather want to talk about these rule-based just-in-time adaptive interventions in general, because while they are great for doing research on those, and for example, if you do a micro-randomized trial with these rule-based just-in-time adaptive interventions, you can also gain causal evidence on this micro timescale, which would be really interesting. But the rule-based just-in-time adaptive interventions have a few issues when it comes to more practical large-scale applications. For example, it's difficult for them to handle opportunistically sampled high-dimensional data, especially when that is sparse or partially missing, because then you would have to define rules for every opportunity or every option where some part of the data could be missing, which of course gets even worse if you want to assess the context more holistically with a lot of different context factors. Then it's also very difficult to do continuous personalization with rule-based models. And you can also suffer from intervention fatigue, because individuals, or the best these rule-based just-in-time adaptive interventions can do is choose the most fitting option out of a predefined list of intervention options. So that's going to repeat at some point and then may cause intervention fatigue in individuals, which we obviously don't want to happen, because we want them to continue using our tools and achieving their goals with that, as long as the tools help them. Now here, generative AI may provide a solution to these problems. And that is what we looked at in the last JITI study, where we tested, can we exchange this decision rule in the just-in-time adaptive intervention concept with a large language model, in which we put into the person and context information, and then ask the model, in this context for this person, would you send a just-in-time adaptive intervention to promote physical activity, yes or no? And then if yes, please also generate the content for us. So you could have ever new content for each intervention that you're sending. And we did that with the following design, where we had 3 personas of cardiac rehab patients with 5 different contexts for each persona, and gave that to the large language model, in this case ChatGPT with GPT-4 model, but also healthcare professionals and laypersons with this task that I just explained, to say, for this context, in this person, would you send a just-in-time adaptive intervention, yes or no? And if yes, please also generate the content. So we ended up with 450 JITI responses, which were then again evaluated by healthcare professionals and laypersons. And the results are pretty interesting, because as you can see here, marked in red, are the ratings for the ChatGPT generated just-in-time adaptive intervention responses. And they were rated as significantly more appropriate to persona and context, phrased more engagingly, potentially more effective, more professional, more likely to induce positive affect, and also less likely to induce negative affect or frustration than the ones generated by laypersons or healthcare professionals. Now, of course, this is still very formative research, and you can't really say anything about actual effectiveness. So for that, we need to actually roll that out and bring the interventions into individuals' lives. But it still shows that this implementation approach of just-in-time adaptive interventions through large language models might be highly promising. But of course, just-in-time adaptive interventions are just one puzzle piece when you want to solve the physical inactivity pandemic. You have to consider a lot of different intervention options. And yeah, JITIs are more one small puzzle piece that can supplement this process. And that's just to put everything into perspective. Right, and with this, we're coming to the limitations and how we're addressing those in future work. First of all, the research that I presented to you is mostly based on correlational research. except maybe for the RCT regarding the results of the effectiveness of the implementation intention in the minimally guided mHealth approach. But for the momentary effects, to actually gain causal inference, you would need micro-randomized trials to robustly test the causal effects on this momentary level. Then we also have problems with EMA reactivity that we have to acknowledge, because the frequent prompting or asking about transitional intentions may, of course, also artificially increase the physical activity engagement and alter participants' natural behavior. So we should actually also test what kind of effect this prompting or asking about transitional intention just in itself already has on individuals' behavior. And that also goes in a pretty similar direction with the automaticity misrepresentation, because as we're asking them about their transitional intentions all the time, we might make this process of physical activity initiation look more reflective than it actually may be in reality, where people may not think about whether they have the intention for the next day as often as when we are prompting it. So for that, we should also assess automaticity explicitly, for example, with an EMA questionnaire. Summing it up, in my key contributions, I looked into the momentary determinants of physical activity and found the relevance of these momentary intentions, which can also then be fostered even more with more specific planning, self-efficacy, and intrinsic attention and intention strength. And also found the role of these effective predictors of intention and behavior, or not in behavior as much, but also through the intention. Based on that, developed the formative model of a formative dynamic conceptual model of physical activity on this micro time scale, and was able to inform just-in-time adaptive intervention, or generally intervention design, with special regards to the effectiveness of implementation intentions in the minimally guided mHealth approach, which can, of course, also be well supplemented with just-in-time adaptive interventions instead of those static reminders, for example, using the decision rules based on the model, or maybe in the future also large language models to have a more adaptive implementation of this process. And with this, there's nothing left to say, but thank you to all of you, and for all of your roles that you had in the past 3 years. And of course, also thank you for listening.